Welcome back to the realm, my lords and ladies. I am the Goat King, and today we are discussing combat pacing in tabletop RPGs. First of all, I want to discuss who this video is mostly directed at, and who I believe it will be able to help the most. This video is made both for GMs and PCs, specifically when there's a group with more than 3 PCs and you're not playing a very simple game. There are definitely game systems where they are simplified enough that these aren't often a problem, and while I do believe that the actions I'm going to describe in this video can help those tables too, this is primarily focused on tables for your more average game and your more average group of players. Why does pacing in combat matter, you may ask? One of the best answers to that is this scenario. A natural 3, I have achieved nothing my turn. Wake me when my turn comes around again, so I may botch my next actions as well. Anyone who has been in a combat where the turn order takes a half hour to get around to your turn again, and is having bad luck with the dice that day, knows this feeling all too well. If the game slows down too much, and luck is preventing you from succeeding when your turn does come around, this can be very painful, and honestly, it gets to the point where you don't feel like you're even playing the game. What's the point of being at the table if every 30 minutes you roll a d20, see it come up a 7, and know that your action has failed, only to wait another half hour fully expecting the same outcome to occur again? It's not satisfying, and it doesn't just hurt that one person, it hurts everybody at the table, because that feeling is infectious, and it'll infect the person next to them and the person next to them, and before long everybody is all too aware of how long it is taking to get around the table. And when it does take this long between turns, people tend to lose focus, especially when, while you're waiting for your turn again, it isn't everybody taking their actions. There's often someone or many someones needing to reference a rule or figure out how their spell works so that they can actually apply it to the situation, digging through the book. And that's not fun to watch. And so it becomes even more boring. And then there's a temptation to do something else, to pull out your phone and scroll Facebook or Twitter or play Balloon Tower Defense. This temptation builds to do other stuff until your turn comes around. And when that happens, when your turn does come around, you're going to be less invested in the game, and you're not going to be prepared to take your actions. So you're going to slow the table down even more. It's a vicious cycle. The GM is affected by this too. They can only maintain interest and focus in this for so long. Sure, they get to build a world, they get to run the NPCs, but the whole point of being here is to play the game, to interact with your players. As the GM may decide the plot, but it's the players who build the story. And if they're not interested, then there is no story. If there's no story, there's no payoff for the GM either. It leads to a collapse of the game. I want to quickly touch on the social contract. As many in our community are aware of, there's this concept of a social contract, an unstated understanding between the players and the GM that we are all here to have fun, and it is everybody's job to help make the game fun. If you have your character act in a certain way, whether it is consistent with the character or not, that actively makes the game less fun for everyone around you, you're being a problem. You're hurting the people around you, regardless of whether you think it's fun to steal from the party. Do they think it's fun to be stolen from? Most people don't. Now, every group is different, and if you know each other really well, you can certainly make some fun roleplay out of that, but that's why it's an unstated rule. It's not written down because the social contract will be subtly different for every group, but it's still there. And a part of keeping the game fun is maintaining the pacing. If you are one of the people at the table who, through malice or simply not being aware of the effect you're having, are causing the pacing of the game to be slowed down and to be harmed, you are hurting the fun for everybody else at the table. Of course, the first and most important step for resolving any issue in the breach of the social contract is to talk to each other openly and honestly. The social contract is typically invisible because it is different for every party, but when you do feel that there is a problem happening, it is important to make sure the other players are on the same page. The GM is on the same page by stating what you believe the problem to be. Or rather than directly stating what the problem is, you may state what your experience of the problem is. Stating it this way is like pulling a punch while making sure that the message is heard. It doesn't make people feel attacked, and yet they still know what's going on. The GM plays a significant part in maintaining the pacing of combat. Simply put, as the GM, you are the structure, the part that makes everything work. If you can't maintain structure, then the table will not maintain pace. One of the most important and maybe obvious, but not always so, parts of maintaining pacing is that anything that becomes superfluous, that isn't affecting the story and isn't having a dramatic impact on the players, should be removed. Once it's no longer contributing, it is only there as a formality. And these formalities can often stack up without us realizing, and when they do, they slow things down. One piece of advice you will hear quite often throughout the community is don't look up rules at the table. Unless you already have the page number and you can look it up really quickly, don't do it. Don't stop the game to find the rule. If you don't know the rule offhand, that's okay. It is a game and there is some flexibility built in. You can make a ruling that sounds fair to you and your players at the time, and then in your notes, just jot down, you had an issue with this. So when you're going through your game prep for the next week or month or however long, you have time to look at the rule and make notes about the rule on a note card that you can bring to the next game. So you can both inform the players what the rule was and whether or not you'll be using the actual rule or the way you ruled it previously, and remember and learn it yourself so you don't need to look it up later. I would always suggest writing down the page number when you take notes about something, be it a rule, a feat, spell, item, anything. This allows for that really quick reference if you need to. And if you can quickly reference something, and then you reference it, you'll learn more about it, and you might not need to reference it the next time. Something to keep in mind, especially about secret information, is that there is a dramatic payoff, and after that dramatic payoff, there is no reason for keeping it secret anymore. Things like resistances and immunities, once the players have tried it and it didn't work, maybe you should just say, yes, that fire attack didn't do anything. You hit the armor class, but that fire didn't hurt it at all. Or after the first attack or two against an enemy, once a player attacks within 1 or 2 of the armor class, tell them what the armor class is. Having these pieces of information available not only changes the kinds of actions the players choose to use, but it also means they are prepared to adjudicate the results. If all your players know what the armor class is ahead of time, they can look at their bonus, look at the armor class, and know what they need to roll on their die to hit. So when they roll their attack, they can see, oh, that was a hit, or oh, that wasn't a hit, immediately. Instead of having to say, oh, was it Sir GM, was a 20 a hit? Oh, you were busy talking to Greg when he had a character question. Okay, let me ask again. Was a 20 a hit? Oh, no. Oh, okay. If they know what the armor class is, they just roll the damage, and then they tell you the damage. Once a secret has had its dramatic payoff, it's not worth keeping anymore. It becomes one of the formalities that slows the game down. There are some secrets that almost continuously provide dramatic payoff, one of which might be the hit points the creature still has, how healthy it is, and how ready for a fight it still is. While you often don't want to give exact numbers, you can give ranges. I personally like to use a note at every quarter of the enemy's health, being uninjured, bloody when it's reduced to 3/4 its total health, wounded when it's at half health, and severely wounded at 1/4 health, with dead being the obvious at 0 health. Keeping these from being entirely secret helps prevent the formalities that slow down play. When preparing encounters, you probably already know to read and understand all the monster's abilities, as well as what its attacks are and what its defenses are like, what kinds of movement it has. But that doesn't quite leave you fully prepared to actually play the game, because at the table, you're going to have to decide how the monster uses these abilities. And, at least in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, monsters can use all the same skill abilities that players can. They still have access to all the athletic skills, trip, shove, grapple, that have access to all of that. Depending what skills a monster may have, and what abilities, attacks, and movement types it may have, you could easily have a dozen or 24 possible options that an individual monster could take. And while that drags down a single enemy encounter a little bit, every additional enemy makes that compound. My method for dealing with this is creating modes of behavior. A mode of behavior is a particular set of actions that the monster prefers. A specific monster in this mode of behavior might prefer to move, intimidate, and attack the nearest player, or the strongest player, or the one that's throwing magic spells at them. That might be a mode of behavior for your monster. When I have one monster, I can easily give it 3 different modes of behavior, so its strategies change during combat depending on the situation. Maybe when it gets to low health, it takes a flee mode of behavior where it drops most of its attacking abilities and uses primarily its movement abilities and spells or special abilities that may help it escape. Early in combat, it might be using an aggressive mode, where it approaches the target and spends as many actions as possible attacking. Or, during that aggressive mode, it might have a set of an action series that looks like approach, trip, attack. So if it's already adjacent, it'll move to trip and then attack again. Or if the character is already prone, it might just attack 3 times, but this is all encompassed in one mode. These modes allow you to have some enemies that are more important in the combat change behavior and still have a variety of actions they take without it being too cognitively taxing on you in the middle of the game. This is prep work, just as understanding what the monster's abilities are is prep work. I typically have my large monsters, if there's only one in the encounter, have 3 modes. Medium monsters, being 2 to 3, maybe 4 of them in an encounter, may have 2 modes each. And for any horde monsters, creatures where I have more than 4 of them in the encounter, I'm only going to give them one particular mode. That's my style. There's a lot of them. Keeping track of more than one mode for each of them is not going to work for me. I will give them all one mode, and if they are the same creature, they will each have the same one mode. In summary, for the GM, you are the structure, and important notes to keep in mind is that you shouldn't keep hidden information hidden beyond its dramatic payoff, and you can prep the behavior of monsters ahead of time. As players at the table, the actions of all of you will take easily half or more of the total game time. This means that maintaining the pace of the game is just as much your job as it is the GM's job, and sometimes it is more the player's job than it is the GM's job. If the game is slowing down, it is still your job to not be part of the problem. As a player, especially in these team-based games, and in some of them where teamwork is exceedingly important, like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, discussing with your fellow players outside the game what you guys might choose to do in certain wild situations can be very helpful. If you know what your fellow party members would typically do in a situation, you can act to aid them and make their abilities stronger. Or you can act in a way where your abilities are complemented by their actions. Knowing this ahead of time, instead of trying to figure it out at the game, will maintain your flow of combat and keep things moving ahead of time. And you'll get that ever elusive, high-functioning, well-oiled team working together to solve problems. You've been told before in the tabletop community, and you will be told again, to know what your abilities do. And a specific note for me that I think is rather important is have the page number for your ability written down next to it. Because we're not perfect. And especially when learning the system, it might be particularly hard to remember all the different things you could do when your turn comes up. So try, of course, but have the page number written down so that even if you only have a vague idea what the ability does, but it seems like it would fit the situation, you can easily take the time between turns to look up what the ability does and figure out if it is going to be useful, or at least know how to use it when your turn comes up. And the same thing applies not only for spells, but also for equipment. In many of these games, especially sci-fi games, you can have a lot of weird and wacky equipment that your characters will have access to. And knowing what it does is a prerequisite to being able to make use of it. So keep page numbers for your spells and equipment as well. Harkening back to the previous statements about teamwork, not only understanding your abilities and spells, but also having an idea for what kinds of situations you would like to apply them in. Spells and abilities that help you escape, having those noted in your head ahead of time means that when that time comes up, you won't need to search through your abilities and spells. You'll go, I have a tool, let me check it real quick. Pull it up, and then you know what it does and you know how to use it. The same goes for when a teammate is down and getting beaten brutally. Knowing what you have to help them ahead of time, having foreseen that at some point you might need to help someone who is being beaten, you can have that stuff noted for. And of course, it is always good to know how you can inflict damage or help an ally inflict damage to particularly resistant monsters. Having ideas built in ahead of time for how you would like to use your spells and abilities will allow you to use them more consistently and more frequently, rather than barely scraping through a fight and then afterwards, when you're not stressed out anymore, looking down and going, oh, damn, that spell would have helped a lot. I wish I'd remembered to use it. A last tip I have specifically for spellcasters, this is something I've done with my spellcasting characters, is on the sheet of paper I've got that lists my spells, I will color code them with highlighter. Specifically, I color code 3 categories: damage, support, and utility. I personally find that this helps me when inevitably I do have to scramble for something, because you can't plan for every situation. Having it organized so you can quickly see what spells do damage or what spells heal allies, I find that particularly useful to have sorted ahead of time. Of course, if you have any tips and tricks for keeping combat fast and snappy in your games, please leave them in the comments below. The more we can all learn from each other, the more fun all of our games will be. I would like to thank you all again for visiting the realm. I have been the Goat King, and come back again next week for more Pathfinder and Starfinder material.